A simple jar vanished, leaving behind a trail no one expected. Welcome to Mystery Parlor. I am your host, Axen. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below. Hearing from you always makes my day. Let's begin. When the doorbell rings at 10:30 in the morning, and Fritz isn't the one to answer it, that's usually my cue. I was 2 sips into my second cup of coffee, in the front room, leafing through the Gazette for anything that might liven up a Tuesday. Wolfe was, as expected, upstairs communing with orchids and ignoring the indignities of the world. I set the cup down, got up, and opened the door. The woman on the other side was wearing a honey-colored trench coat that could have walked a Paris runway on its own, paired with high-heeled restraint and lipstick that didn't apologize for showing up before noon. Her eyebrows told me she wasn't thrilled to be there, and her perfume sharp citrus over something woodsy gave me the sense that she preferred being in charge. She held a brown paper bag in one gloved hand like it might explode. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, her voice clipped and impatient. "You'll have to settle for Goodwin," I said. "Archie Goodwin, Wolfe's assistant, and depending on who you ask, the guy who keeps him from turning into a potted plant." She didn't smile. "You were recommended. May I come in? Only if that bag isn't ticking." She breezed past me with the confidence of someone who'd never been refused anything in her life. I followed her into the front room, where she perched on the edge of the red chair like it might stain. I closed the door behind us. "Name?" I asked. "Florence Avery." She said it like she expected me to recognize it. I didn't. I took the chair opposite her. "What can we do for you, Miss Avery?" She gave me a glance that suggested she preferred Ms., but let it slide. "I need to speak with Mr. Wolfe, privately." "That depends," I said. "Is this about a murder, a fortune, or something that smells like legal trouble?" She hesitated, then held up the paper bag. "This is domestic. Personal, but significant. I'll explain everything to him." I'd prefer not to waste time explaining twice. That was enough to light up my curiosity circuit. I went to the elevator and buzzed Wolfe. He answered after the 4th buzz, which meant I was already on thin ice. "Yes, I've got a Miss Florence Avery downstairs with something in a paper bag and a tone that suggests either danger or drama. She says it's personal, significant, and for you." A silence. "Then if it is not edible, Archie, she will have wasted her time." "It might be. Want me to sniff it?" "No. Bring her up." Wolfe was in his chair, as monumental as ever, wrapped in a yellow silk robe that made him look like a very intelligent banana. He glanced at Miss Avery as she entered, and though his eyes barely flickered, I knew he was already weighing her, measuring her utility against his aggravation. "Miss Avery," he said. "Sit. Speak." She did. "You may not remember me. 6 years ago, my firm catered the Palgrave engagement party. I recall the pâté, unforgivably sweet," Wolfe said, "and the olives which were not Sirignola." That stopped her. She blinked, recalibrating. "Yes. Well, I didn't come about a wedding. This is about theft, possibly sabotage. Certainly violation." "Of what?" She reached into the bag and drew out an empty glass jar, wide-mouthed, industrial-sized, the kind of thing you'd find in a restaurant kitchen or a high-end home pantry. It had a torn label and a small gold ribbon still knotted around the rim. "This jar," she said, "was full when I left it on the shelf 2 days ago. Imported olives from a private Sicilian grower, extremely rare, extremely expensive. I brought them in as a taste highlight for an exclusive menu I'm building for the Grand Central Gourmet Gala." "Which you're catering?" I asked. "Which I'm curating. Florence Avery tastings. I work in elevated culinary experiences." Wolfe sniffed. "Food as theater. Food as art," she corrected. "The olives disappeared yesterday. My staff claims ignorance. The kitchen was locked. No break-in. Nothing else touched. But someone took them." Wolfe raised his brows. "You came here because someone stole your olives?" "No," she said. "I came because someone wanted me to know they took them." That got even Wolfe to lean a fraction forward. she continued. In place of the olives, this was left. She reached into the bag again and pulled out a small folded card. I took it from her and read aloud. You've seasoned your success with other people's secrets. Time to taste your own. Wolfe's nostrils flared slightly. A threat disguised as metaphor. Unpardonably vague. That's why I came to you, she said, her voice firm now. I've built my career with discretion and refinement. If someone's trying to ruin that, or worse, using my work as a weapon, I need it stopped before it spreads. Quietly, Wolfe didn't reply. He stared at her, then at the jar, then, finally, at me. Archie. Yes. Have we anything scheduled for the rest of the week that cannot be deferred? Nothing that pays. He nodded once. Slowly. Miss Avery, I accept. But I warn you, my methods are sedentary. You will not find them dynamic. Mr. Goodwin will act in my stead. She gave a cool smile. If your mind is as precise as your palate, I'll take my chances. Wolfe grunted. Tati. Archie, see Miss Avery out. Then contact Mr. Panza. I want a preliminary profile on her business staff, client's history. Someone has salted her pride. I intend to know who. I escorted her to the door. As she stepped out, she turned and looked at me. For what it's worth, she said, they were the best olives I'd ever tasted. She left. I stood there a second, holding an empty jar and a note that smelled faintly of basil and spite. Behind me, Wolfe rang for beer. Fritz was not amused. The jar had barely touched the kitchen counter before he descended on me, with a look usually reserved for scorched saucepans and badly behaved veal. You brought glass into my pantry, he said accusatory, as if I'd tracked mud into a chapel, from outside. It's evidence, I told him. Also, the olives are gone, so technically it's an empty jar, which I believe makes it sterile until proven guilty. He sniffed, not at the jar, but at the concept. Nothing is sterile if touched by mischief. Leave it. I'll cleanse it. Not yet. Wolfe wants it in one piece, preferably unboiled. You can glare at it later. I carried the jar back into the office, set it on Wolfe's desk blotter, and settled in the red chair. He was studying the note again, holding it at arm's length like it might smell. She's not lying, I said. Wolfe looked up, his face unreadable. About what? About being targeted. You saw her hands, steady, her voice controlled. But when she mentioned the olives, something in her throat clicked. That wasn't about food. That was about pride. Somebody's poking her where it hurts. He let out a breath through his nose, soft but audible. Mr. Goodwin, many people base their identities on matters less palatable than Sicilian olives. Do not confuse gourmet sensibilities with sincerity. Still, you are correct. The tone of the note suggests familiarity, someone who knows her habits, her concerns, and her pantry, I added. The theft wasn't about resale. Whoever took those olives wanted her rattled, not robbed. Wolfe grunted. Yes. The thief replaced the item, not with absence, but with message. A deliberate exchange. That implies a personal grievance, one she may not yet have acknowledged. I leaned forward. You want me to start with the staff? Start with Mr. Panza's findings. He will have a list. Begin with those closest to the operations of her business. Focus on personnel with access and reason for resentment, past or present. He pushed the note aside like it had already told him everything useful. There is another wrinkle. I waited. He did this sometimes. Paused not because he was hesitating, but because he enjoyed dragging your attention forward like a trout on a line. The ribbon. I blinked. The gold one? Yes. An affectation. It served no function on the jar. Miss Avery did not mention it. Yet it remained when the olives were removed and the message inserted. That suggests one of two things. The ribbon was placed by the thief as part of the display, or it was part of the original packaging and left untouched. And if it was the thief's edition, then it is a message of its own, a touch of irony, a bow atop sabotage. He closed his eyes. You will go, Archie. Find the wound she's trying to hide. I stood. Any preferences for my method of slicing? He waved a hand. As always, surgically. By 4 o'clock, Saul Panzer had delivered a preliminary dossier, thick enough to choke a parrot. I skimmed it while sipping lukewarm coffee in a downtown cafe that reeked of cinnamon and desperation. According to Saul, Florence Avery ran her business like a general with an art degree, precision menus, hush-hush clients, and a small elite team she kept on a short, elegant leash. The suspects, if we could call them that this early in the game, came into view fast. There was a sous chef named Gavin Pike, recently demoted after a plating incident involving raw tuna and a startled senator, a senior event manager, Dahlia Brandt, who'd quit 6 weeks ago under a cloud of creative differences, a rival consultant, Nate Holbrook, known for his ego and his proximity. His studio shared a corridor wall with Florence's test kitchen, and finally one of her suppliers, Franco del Muro, who apparently thought exclusive rights meant occasional shouting. I decided to start close to the flame. Avery Tastings had their main prep kitchen on the second floor of a converted Tribeca loft, and the receptionist, who wore her sarcasm as tightly as her headset, recognized Florence's name, but not mine. When I dropped wolves, she hesitated, then gave me a clipped smile and paged someone named Nita. Nita Torres turned out to be Florence's kitchen manager, with sleeves rolled, hair tied, and the expression of a woman who had cleaned up more than a few disasters that had nothing to do with spilled sauce. She led me through a corridor of sleek black counters and chrome appliances, until we reached a tasting room with a single white table, a row of wine glasses and a clipboard laid like a scalpel at the edge. "You're with Miss Avery?" she asked. "I'm with the man she hired," I replied. "Florence said the olives were stolen. I say the theft was a message. You're in charge of this space. Did anything else feel off?" Nita crossed her arms. I checked inventory myself that morning. Everything was where it should have been, except the jar. No signs of a break-in. No alarms. Whoever took it had a key code. Who has the code? 4 people. Me, Florence, Gavin Pike, and Dahlia Brandt. Dahlia's code was supposed to be deactivated. Supposed to be. I made a mental note. Tell me about Dahlia. Nita's mouth flattened. Smart, capable, sharp tongue. She didn't like being second-guessed, and she didn't like Gavin. She and Florence fought over menu authority. She walked out after a fight about culinary direction. Her words, still in contact. No. At least not with me. And Gavin? Nita hesitated. He's been quiet since the demotion. Doesn't complain, but you can see it in his hands. He chops like the vegetables insulted his mother. I nodded. And Franco del Muro? Nita sighed. He supplied the olives, imported them under some kind of handshake deal with Florence. He's possessive, said once, that those olives don't belong on other people's tongues. Poetic. Creepy. I thanked her, promised not to touch anything, and left with a sharper picture forming behind my eyes. This wasn't industrial espionage. This was personal, about pride. Maybe even love, the kind that curdles when it goes unappreciated. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was reading Pliny the Elder. I handed him my notes and poured 2 fingers of brandy, one for each of us, mine in a glass, his in silence. He read, nodded once, then said, "Miss Brandt first, then Mr. Pike. In that order. You think Dahlia's our olive snatcher. I think she has motive, access, and temperament. Mr. Pike may have fury, but Miss Brandt has style. That ribbon, that was style. Want me to bring her in? Not yet. Let her stew. Reach her first. Hear her speak. Then we will bait the hook." He closed his book and reached for the bell. Dinner was about to be served, and for once the olives were not invited. The next morning started with a reminder that not everyone in New York considers 9 o'clock too early for trouble. I was halfway through buttering a croissant and enjoying the rare quiet of a Wednesday when the phone rang. Fritz gave me a glance that said, "Don't drip crumbs on the handset." so I wiped my fingers and picked it up. Goodwin. A crisp voice came through, one I hadn't heard before. Female, but not Florence Avery. Harsher, more brittle. This is Delia Brandt. You left a message with my building concierge. You said you're investigating a theft at Florence Avery Tastings. I hadn't expected a call back quite so quickly, or quite so sharply. I motioned to Wolfe through the office door, but he was already listening, book lowered. That's right, Miss Brandt, I said. Archie Goodwin, working under Nero Wolfe. Just a few questions. In person would be better. You're in luck, she replied. I'm on my way to meet a client near Midtown. You've got 15 minutes if you can meet me on the corner of Madison and 49th. Done. I grabbed my coat. Wolfe didn't speak, but I saw the faintest dip of his chin as I passed the office. His version of don't come back without something juicy. Janet. Delia Brandt was dressed like she'd stepped out of a fashion editor's sketch pad. Angular wool coat, hair in a tight platinum twist, sunglasses that didn't care about clouds. She stood beside a vendor cart sipping what looked like bad espresso, and when I introduced myself, she offered a handshake like she was giving away a coupon. I assume Florence made this more dramatic than it is, she said. She always did think anything less than sabotage was beneath her. Depends how you define sabotage, I said. Somebody lifted a rare jar of olives from her kitchen and left her a note with enough menace to ruin her appetite. Delia smiled thinly. If Florence's appetite survived her last menu tasting, it's invincible. Would you like to explain why your access code still worked after you quit? She didn't flinch. I wouldn't know. I stopped using it after I left. If she forgot to disable it, that's on her. Yet you knew about the missing olives. She raised an eyebrow above her sunglasses. That's public now, or is that your way of telling me I'm the prime suspect? Let's just say the jar has your name floating near it. She exhaled, not quite a sigh, more of a deliberate pause to choose her next move. Florence and I had creative differences. That's true. She wanted elegance. I wanted relevance. We parted ways, but if I were going to steal from her, I'd take her vinaigrette recipe, not olives. Do you have enemies in common? She sipped her espresso. Florence makes enemies the way other people make reservations. Everyone wants a taste, but no one wants to stay for the whole meal. She makes promises she doesn't always keep. Clients, vendors, sometimes even her staff. Anyone specific come to mind? Franco Del Muro, she said immediately. The supplier. He had a thing for her. Got possessive. He even cornered her after a tasting and said something like, "If I can't trust your lips, no one should." That's poetic. She shrugged. Or Italian. I thanked her, gave her my card, and she turned on her heel like we were done. Which we were. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe listened as I recounted the whole encounter. When I quoted Dalia's line about Franco, Wolfe held up a finger to stop me. Say that again. If I can't trust your lips, no one should. He leaned back, eyes narrowing. That is not simply poetic, Mr. Goodwin. That is possessive in the culinary sense. You think he was in love with her? Worse. He thinks she betrayed something sacred. His product. His pride. The theft was not merely punishment. It was reclamation. The olives were his. Her use of them was, in his mind, abuse. Want me to talk to him? No, Wolfe said, surprising me. First we bait the kitchen. Come again. I want you to visit Florence's kitchen again. This time under pretense an equipment check, inventory clarification. What you will, leave the door unsecured when you go. Return 2 hours later. Something will have shifted. I blinked. You think someone's going to come back and fiddle with the scene of the crime? Not the crime, Wolfe said. The insult. A second violation often follows the first, when the message hasn't landed. The thief may feel unfinished, and if nothing happens, he shrugged, then at least we confirm the appetite is gone. That afternoon I returned to Avery Tastings, armed with a clipboard, a confident smile, and the kind of swagger that only comes with pretending to be official. Nita Torres was busy overseeing a plating exercise that looked more like abstract sculpture than food. So I slipped into the pantry alone, unlocked the inner door leading to dry storage, and left it slightly ajar. Then I left. 2 hours later, with Wolfe on the line in my ear like a conscience that smelled of beer and orchids. I returned. Nita met me at the door, confused. "Did you come back already?" she asked. "No." "Why?" She frowned. Someone was in the tasting room. The chair was out, and one of the wine glasses had lipstick, red. Florence's. She doesn't wear lipstick in the kitchen. I stepped into the pantry and immediately saw it, on the stainless steel shelf where the olive jar had stood. Something new gleamed under the spotlight. A salt shaker. Not a fancy one, basic diner style, glass and chrome cap. But on top of it, a ribbon, gold, and next to it, folded neatly, another note. "Taste is not ownership. You've stolen enough." I left it untouched and called Wolfe. He listened without interrupting. "Gold ribbon again," I said, "and a message that feels less poetic, more final." He responded quietly. "The thief is escalating, but not erratically. This is no simple revenge. It is a performance." "You said the lipstick was not Florence's." "Correct." Nita confirmed it. "Then we have our profile. Someone who wants to be known, but not caught. Someone theatrical. Someone with culinary access and emotional stakes. Mr. Holbrook is next, the rival consultant. Yes, his proximity is literal, his rivalry personal. You will speak with him tomorrow. What about Franco? We will draw him to us." "How?" Wolfe smiled. "By cooking." I called Nate Holbrook the next morning, pretending to be a journalist from Culinary Visions Quarterly. If there's one thing I've learned from watching chefs, it's that the only thing they like more than control is credit. I told him I was doing a feature on elite food consultants, and that Florence Avery had suggested his name as a foil to her style. "Of course she did," he said with a short laugh. "She's obsessed with contrast. Fine, come by around noon. My studio's in Soho. Try not to wear corduroy." I promised to dress to the occasion, and hung up. Holbrook's studio turned out to be a long glass cube above a bakery, filled with minimalist furniture and plants that looked expensive and angry. A single teak prep table stood in the middle of the room under a pendant light, polished to a mirror finish. On it sat 3 identical amuse-bouches arranged like chess pieces and a long-stemmed glass of something too clear to be vodka, but too smug to be water. Holbrook himself wore a short-sleeved black chef's coat with no logo, tight jeans, and the kind of tan that suggested good lighting rather than sun. He gave me a handshake that lasted exactly 1 second too long, and motioned to a stool, and motioned to a stool, and motioned. He turned his gaze toward Florence. "Who, Miss Avery, had access to your kitchen, the opportunity to observe Franco's anger, and the vanity to insert themselves into your narrative." She was quiet. For the first time since she'd arrived, she looked unsure. Then, softly, "Gavin Pike." Franco looked up, startled. Wolfe nodded. "Of course. The demoted sous chef. A man with cause to resent both of you. You demoted him, Miss Avery. And Franco replaced his ingredient in prestige. Gavin's pride was wounded twice. Once by being pushed down, and once by watching someone else's product be lifted up," I added. "And he had access. Nita told me he still had the code." Florence stood again. "He wouldn't. He's precise, but he's not. He is not obvious," Wolfe said. "But subtlety thrives in kitchens, where appearances matter, where symbolism hides in flavor. He mimicked Franco to escalate the game, and perhaps to distract us from his own agenda." "What would that agenda be?" Florence asked, her voice now tight. "To make you unstable, to call your curation into question, perhaps to reclaim influence within your brand, or perhaps just to spoil what he couldn't control." I turned to Franco. "Did anyone else know about the olive theft?" He hesitated. "Only Nita. I ranted to her when I heard about the gala." Florence winced. She didn't mention that. She didn't want to, Wolfe said. But she knew, which means Gavin could have heard as well. And if he did, he saw a story forming. One he could finish better than Franco ever could. I paced once, letting the picture settle. He had motive, access, and the timing. And red lipstick? That feels like a flourish. Indeed, Wolfe said. Theatrical, effeminate, perhaps. Not necessarily his own, but a borrowed symbol. He wanted the message to confuse. Florence looked down at the salt shaker, then at the second note. He wanted me to think Franco had lost control. Wolfe nodded. Yes, and you did. There was a knock on the door. I opened it to find Sol Panza standing with a calm look and a small envelope in his hand. For Wolfe, he said. From a trash bin in Avery Tastings. Wolfe took it and opened it carefully. Inside was a printed email thread, torn but readable. Gavin, I saw what you left in the room. That wasn't part of the plan. You're playing too rough. We talked about being symbolic, not psychotic. That's... Florence gasped. Nita knew. Wolfe placed the email on the table. She may have participated, or simply watched. Either way, she became aware and chose silence. Franco stood. You used me, both of you. Florence turned to him, her voice raw. I didn't know, but you used the olives. That was enough. Wolfe stood. Slowly, heavily. Mr. Del Muro, Miss Avery, you have been played, each in turn by someone with just enough talent and malice to embroider harm onto performance. He looked at me. Call Miss Torres, politely. She will not come, but she will and Gavin. Wolfe looked at the olives, untouched now. He will run. That is what cowards do when their flavor turns bitter. Florence sat back down. The olives between us were silent, glistening. Dinner would be late tonight, and cold. When I called Nita Torres, she answered on the second ring, her voice as composed as it had been the first time we'd met. But when I told her why I was calling, the tone cracked, just a little like a too thin pie crust under pressure. I assume you found something, she said. I assume you hoped we wouldn't, I replied. Care to explain your part in this kitchen melodrama before someone less polite than me asks the same question with a badge? A pause. Then I didn't plan it. I didn't help him. Not at first. But I knew. Knew what? That Gavin took the olives, that he'd gotten into the pantry again. After Franco. No. Before. Gavin took them before Franco ever touched them. That brought me up short. You're saying Franco didn't steal the jar? No. He just thought he had. She sighed. It was all Gavin. He was the one who overheard Florence raving about the olives, how they'd be the center of her gala concept. He hated that. Said the whole thing was a betrayal, that she was selling out, making food about luxury and theater, not craft. He said Franco's precious olives were being used like costume jewelry. And what did you say to that? I said he was being dramatic, she admitted. But he was hurt. He'd already been demoted. He'd lost his shot at developing the gala menu. Florence barely spoke to him after that. I rubbed my temples with my free hand. So he steals the olives, writes the first note, leaves it where Florence will find it, and then what? You find out. A day later, he bragged. Said he'd reclaimed the story. That he gave her a message she'd actually listened to. I kept my voice even. And you didn't go to Florence? She wouldn't have listened. And part of me, I don't know. I thought maybe it was symbolic, that it did, but it didn't. No, she exhaled. He went back in. I told him not to. I begged him not to. But he wanted to escalate. That was the word he used. And the salt shaker. His idea. Something basic, something humble, to mock her whole aesthetic. And the lipstick? A pause again. Mine, she said. I didn't know he took it until after. It was just gone from my locker one day. I asked him, he laughed. So there it was, not just a thief, not just a saboteur, but a man so obsessed with undermining a vision. He no longer had a place in that he'd taken a woman's lipstick to add punctuation to his drama. I hung up shortly after, with Wolfe listening on the extension. When I returned to the office, he was still in his chair, motionless but fully alert. "She confirmed it," I said. "Gavin did both acts. Franco's just the red herring." "Poetic," Wolfe murmured. "Though olive herring may be more apt. He used Franco's anger as a smokescreen." "Smart, if you're cruel enough. Or desperate," Wolfe said. "Desperation and brilliance are often bedfellows, but only one usually survives the morning." I poured myself a drink. Wolfe didn't ask for beer. That was never a good sign. "What do we do?" I asked. "Call the cops." "Florence?" "We call no one," Wolfe said. "Yet." He steepled his fingers. "Mr. Goodwin, you will find Mr. Pike. Now, this." I caught up with Gavin Pike in a place no self-respecting chef should have been caught dead. The third booth at a tired bar off Avenue B, where the cocktails came in plastic tumblers and the only garnish was regret. He looked thinner than I remembered, and not just in the waist. His shoulders slumped, his knuckles fidgeted. The man had the look of a souffle that had caved in on itself. He didn't notice me until I was seated across from him. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, stiff. "Don't tell me Florence sent you." "Nope," Wolfe did. That got a flicker of fear. Not panic, just the beginning twitch of a man who knew the game might be up. "I assume you know why," I added. He nodded once, then drained his glass. "You figured it out, more or less. You stole the olives, left the note. Then, when Franco got all puffed up, you staged the second act to make him look like the villain." Gavin didn't speak for a moment. Then I was trying to remind her. Of what? That food isn't performance. That the kitchen isn't a gallery. "And you thought theft would do that." "I thought symbolism would." The olives mattered. They had history, craft. They weren't supposed to be reduced to a garnish in some glass cube for a room full of people who care more about pairings than process. "And the lipstick?" I asked. He grimaced. "I knew she'd never wear red. I wanted Florence to feel watched, like someone had been in her house wearing a costume." "You sound like a playwright," I said. He almost smiled. "In another life, maybe." I leaned forward. "You know what Wolfe's going to do?" "No," he admitted. "He's going to give Florence a choice. That's how he works. If you're lucky, she'll just fire you and freeze you out of the food world. If you're not, I'll be arrested. Or worse, forgotten." That hit him harder than the legal threat. His hands stilled. "I never wanted to ruin her," he said. "I just wanted her to see." "She will," I said. "That's the problem." Back at the brownstone, I found Wolfe with Florence in the office. She stood tense, arms folded. The tray of olives was gone. Fritz, I assumed, had cleared the last traces of the tasting and returned the kitchen to its sacred order. Florence turned to me when I entered. "Well," he confessed, "both intrusions, both notes." "The lipstick belonged to Nita." Florence nodded, just once. She looked tired, but not surprised. "I should have seen it," she said. "No," Wolfe said. "You were meant not to." She sat. Finally, Wolfe eyed her. "I will do nothing further unless you ask it," he said. "If you wish to press charges, I will support your claim with full documentation. If you choose instead to dismiss him, I recommend silence. Let the exile carry its own weight." She was quiet. "I built everything from scratch," she said at last. He knew that. He watched me. "And now he has watched it from the outside," Wolfe said. "He wanted to be remembered. You must decide whether you will grant him that." Florence exhaled. "He's gone." Wolfe nodded. She rose, smoothed her dress, and looked at the salt shaker still on the side table. "I'll take that," she said. "As a warning?" I asked. "As a reminder," she said. "That flavor without respect is just noise." She left without another word. Wolfe finally rang for beer. I joined him. "You knew from the start it wasn't just about olives?" I said. "Of course," Wolfe replied. Nothing rare and bitter ever is. The following day, Wolfe returned to his usual state of semi-splendid isolation. He spent the morning upstairs with the orchids and the afternoon in his chair reading a monograph on the social hierarchy of bees. I let him be. After a week that had included one stolen jar of olives, 2 staged intrusions, and an assistant with theatrical delusions, even a man with Wolfe's stamina for human absurdity needed a breather. Me, I wasn't so lucky. By 10:30, I'd taken 2 phone calls, one from Saul Panzer, reporting that Gavin Pike had packed a duffel bag and left his apartment at dawn, and another from a junior food blogger who'd heard rumors of a pantry scandal at Avery Tastings and wanted a quote. I told her the only scandal I'd seen recently was the price of truffle oil, and hung up. By noon, I was halfway through a roast beef sandwich when the doorbell rang. Fritz answered before I could stand. A moment later he appeared in the office, immaculate as ever, holding a calling card like it was a surgical instrument. "A Miss Lillian Cord," he announced. "She insists she won't take long." Wolfe raised an eyebrow. "Miss Cord? She says she's a journalist," Fritz added, voice flat. Wolfe sighed. "Bring her in." Lillian Cord turned out to be 30-ish, sharply dressed in herringbone tweed and lipstick the color of dry cherries. She moved like she'd been taught to stride, not walk. Her eyes swept the room once, efficiently before landing on Wolfe. "I'll be brief, Mr. Wolfe," she said. "I know your time is precious, and your tolerance for press is legendary. But I believe you may want to hear what I've found." "That depends," Wolfe replied, "on whether it concerns food, orchids, or murder. Otherwise, the appeal is limited." She smiled. "Not quite differential. What about sabotage? Reputation damage? Culinary revenge?" Wolfe made a noise that might have been interest. "I'm listening." She turned slightly, speaking to both of us now. "My sources tell me Miss Florence Avery has had multiple mishaps this season. Not just the olive incident. 3 other clients, all high profile, all anonymous, have reported last-minute problems with her menus, lost orders, substitutions they didn't authorize. One dish arrived so off-profile that the client canceled the contract. "That's new," I said. "Is it?" she asked. "You've spoken with her. Would she have told you?" Wolfe tapped a finger on the armrest. "Who are your sources?" "Private. But 2 are former clients. One is a caterer who overheard a conversation at the culinary hall." Wolfe scowled. "So hearsay, filtered through ambition." Lillian didn't flinch. "Perhaps, but the pattern is clear. Someone is undermining Florence Avery's business, subtly, but with consistency." I leaned forward. "You think Gavin Pike wasn't working alone?" She met my gaze. "I think Gavin Pike was the most theatrical, but not the only one invested in her failure." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Are you proposing a conspiracy?" "No," she said, "but I am proposing intent. Miss Avery has many admirers. She also has rivals. If someone saw an opportunity to erode her prestige, perhaps while she was distracted by internal drama, they might take it." Wolfe nodded slowly. "Miss Cord, do you have any names?" "One. Dahlia Brandt." That earned a beat of silence. "She told me," Lillian continued, "that Florence invites her own disasters. When I pressed, she said something curious. Reputation is seasoning. It only takes a little too much to ruin the dish." Wolfe looked at me. "That matches the metaphorical tone of our original notes." Lillian nodded. "Exactly." I frowned. "But Dahlia wasn't behind the notes." "We're sure of that." "Correct," Wolfe said. "But Miss Brandt may have chosen another form of mischief." I looked back at Lillian. "You think Dahlia was manipulating things from a distance, sabotaging menus, planting doubts?" "I think," she said, "she wanted Florence's crown, without the blood. And Gavin, being wounded and volatile, made an excellent smokescreen." "Do you have any proof?" Lillian's smile was sharp. "Not yet, but I have a dinner invitation. Dahlia's hosting a private tasting tonight. Theme: redemption and reinvention. You tell me." "Mr. Wolfe, What kind of chef announces redemption unless they've done something that needs redeeming? Wolfe didn't react much when I relayed the invitation, but the fact that he didn't send me to the door with a scowl told me he was intrigued. "Attend," he said. "Taste, listen, observe. And if Miss Brant mentions the word olive, do not leave without a confession or a dessert menu." Understood. I cleaned up, changed into a suit that made me look less like a detective and more like a donor, and showed up at the loft venue. Delia Brant had transformed into a modernist temple of small plates. There were 12 guests, mostly influencers and critics. Delia moved among them like a sommelier of tension, pairing her dishes with quips and long glances. The first course was a broth poured tableside into a bowl of pickled garlic flowers and pine-smoked radish. Elegant, deceptively simple, and definitely more performance than nourishment. By the second course, lamb tongue with hibiscus glaze, Delia approached my end of the table and gave me a smile like she already knew I wasn't there for the food. "Mr. Goodwin," she said. "What an unexpected pleasure." "I was curious," I replied. "Redemption and reinvention is a bold theme." "It's a bold industry," she said. "You either adapt or get pickled in someone else's brine." I lifted an eyebrow. "Florence ever say that?" "She said a lot of things. I just plate them better." She moved on. I let her, but I watched her carefully. The final dish was the clincher, a twist on a traditional Sicilian dessert, olive oil cake, garnished with candied lemon zest, and a single black olive resting in the center like punctuation. I didn't react visibly, but inside, every nerve Wolfe had trained into suspicion lit up. After dessert, I approached her quietly. "You've got nerve," I said. "An olive, really?" She didn't look embarrassed. She looked amused. "Context," she said. "It's not Florence's olive." "No," I said. "It's your little wink. Your signature. You've been poking holes in her reputation from the sidelines, haven't you?" "If I were," she said, "you'd never prove it." "I don't have to," I replied. "Wolfe will." That landed. She stiffened, just slightly, then turned on her heel and disappeared into the kitchen. I didn't follow. I didn't need to, because at that moment, I knew something Wolfe would be ready to hear. The sabotage wasn't just emotional. It was strategic. Someone wanted Florence Avery's fall to be slow, soft, and inevitable, and they'd almost succeeded. But almost doesn't cut it when Wolfe's on your trail. And the trail had just turned from olives to something sharper. The next morning began like most at the brownstone, with Fritz's perfectly timed eggs, Wolfe's glowering silence over the Times, and me trying to decide if I should stir the pot. This time the pot had Delia Brant's name floating on top, like oil on soup. Wolfe didn't look up from the paper when he spoke. "You observed the olive." "I observed it," I said, buttering a roll. Black, glossy, and sitting in the middle of an olive oil cake like it had been assigned the role of sinister mascot. He turned a page without comment. "And Delia gave me a line about reinvention. She's not just needling Florence anymore. She's rewriting the menu." "Indeed," Wolfe said. He laid the paper aside, finally meeting my eyes. "She will not confess," he said, "not until the setting is hers. You must give her that. You want me to draw her out." "I want you," he said, "to invite her to the brownstone." I blinked. "You want her to step into enemy territory?" "She will come," Wolfe replied, "because she believes Florence has no evidence, and that I, being Florence's instrument, pose no threat without it. Her pride will escort her through our door." "You think she's that confident?" "I think," he said, "she's been seasoning Florence's fall for months. She believes herself the rightful heir to Avery tastings. That makes her vulnerable. She will gloat. She will frame her choices as vision, and I will dismantle her with her own narrative." He closed the paper. "Call her." To my surprise, Delia accepted the invitation with only a hint of caution in her voice. "I'm assuming Florence won't be present." "She won't," I said. "Just Wolfe and me." No forks, no flashbulbs, no drama. That last one was a lie. But I said it smoothly enough. She arrived at 6:30, wrapped in a navy coat and self-assurance. I met her at the door. "The lair of the beast," she said lightly. "If the beast wore slippers and preferred beer to blood," I replied. She followed me to the office. Wolfe didn't stand. Dahlia didn't seem to expect him to. "Miss Brandt," he said without preamble, "please sit." She did, crossing one leg over the other with the casual elegance of someone who'd once studied dance or deceit. "You requested this meeting," she said. "I'm curious what you believe I've done." "Belief is insufficient," Wolfe replied. "I have deduced what you've done, and I am about to explain it to you, without metaphor, without theatricality." Her lips parted in mild protest, but he cut her off with a glance. "You resented Florence Avery," he began. "You believed she minimized your contributions, controlled your advancement, and denied you visibility. When you left Avery Tastings, you concealed the true reason, not creative divergence, but ambition thwarted. You did not simply want your own space. You wanted hers. You wanted her diminished." "That's quite a story," she said coolly. Wolfe continued, undeterred. "You recognized, however, that Florence's position could not be assailed directly. She was too respected, so you eroded her reputation from the margins. You contacted former clients. You whispered about inconsistencies. You suggested that her palate was slipping. You manipulated substitutions, and when Gavin Pike acted on his own petty grievances, you saw your opportunity." Interesting theory. Not theory. Synthesis. He gestured toward me. I handed over the folded email Saul had unearthed. Nita's message to Gavin, expressing alarm at his second intrusion. Wolfe didn't offer it to Dahlia. He merely referenced it. "Miss Torres, of course, did not contact you directly, but she did mention her unease to someone else. That someone worked for a small staffing firm, kitchen stage, and had coffee with you last Thursday." Now Dahlia's face twitched. Just slightly. Wolfe saw it. "You offered them a contract if they diverted Florence's pastry supplier to one of your new clients. You framed it as competition, but it was interference. Miss Cord, the journalist, has confirmation of that contact, and she has a recording, one that contains your voice, saying Florence has had it too easy for too long." That finally made Dahlia speak. "You think I sabotaged her because I resented being a footnote." "I do not think it," Wolfe said. "I know it." He sat back. "You poisoned the broth. Not with arsenic, but with implication. And while Florence was preoccupied with Gavin Pike's performance, you were rewriting the final act." Dahlia stood. "You can't prove half of that," she said. "No," Wolfe said calmly. "But Miss Cord's article she will publish tonight. She gave me that courtesy. Florence will read it before the gala. And you, if you have sense, will cancel your tasting series and re-emerge later under a new name." Dahlia looked at me, then back at Wolfe. "You've always preferred punishment over understanding." "No," Wolfe said. "I merely find that understanding is punishment when properly administered." Dahlia left without another word. The door closed behind her, like punctuation. Recovered. 15 minutes later the phone rang. Wolfe picked it up himself. "Yes." I heard Florence's voice faintly. "I've read the draft." "Then you understand the scale of the erosion." A pause. "Then I trusted her." Wolfe's reply was soft but unyielding. "You trusted many who wished to be you. That is the tax of excellence." She said nothing. Finally, "What do I do now?" "You resume," he said. "You curate. And you allow the bitterness to enhance the flavor, not define it." She hung up. Wolfe sat back, closed his eyes. "Fritz will serve tonight?" I asked. "He will," Wolfe replied. "And the olives?" He cracked an eyelid. "Return to Florence, where they belong." I nodded. Outside, the sky was the color of salt and smoke. Inside, dinner would be served. And for once, nobody was going to steal it. The next morning, the city woke to the rustle of newsprint and the buzz of scandal. Lillian Cord's article had dropped at dawn, and by 8:00 a.m., it had already ignited the food world like a flambe torch on high. The headline was blunt, almost surgical: "The Bitter Garnish, Florence Avery, Sabotage and the Fall of a Culinary Darling." Underneath was everything. The olive theft, the symbolic salt shaker, the notes, the lipstick, the internal betrayals. Dahlia Brandt's role wasn't spelled out with direct accusations. Lillian was smarter than that, but the implication was woven through every paragraph. Clients spoke anonymously about misplaced dishes, slipping attention, and a kitchen that no longer felt sacred. Quotes from insiders hinted at undermined orders and redirected contracts. Gavin Pike's drama got its moment too, but the star villain was not the sous chef, it was the former protégé. At 9:15, Florence Avery called. Wolfe let the phone ring once before answering. Yes. Her voice was low but steady. "I suppose it's over," Wolfe replied. "No. It's begun. You sound optimistic." "I am not. I am precise." There was a pause. "May I speak with Archie?" Wolfe didn't look at me. He simply handed me the receiver like he was passing the salt. "Miss Avery," I said, leaning back in the red chair. "Goodwin," she said. "Tell me honestly, how bad is the fallout? You want the street version or the brand consultant version?" "Yours version. Yours." "Well," I said, "the wolves are sniffing at the edges, but none have bitten yet. The article paints you as victim, not fool. That buys sympathy, and in your world, sympathy is just refined curiosity." Another pause. "And Dahlia, she's already issued a statement, regret over a complicated personal dynamic, which translates to I lost control of the narrative. She's postponed her tasting series out of sensitivity. That's damage control. She'll disappear for a bit, maybe pivot to pop-ups in Jersey." Florence exhaled. "I never imagined it would come to this. When I hired you, it was just about a missing jar of olives." I smiled. "Everything starts small. Then someone adds heat." She went quiet for a moment. "Then will Wolfe take another job from me?" "Someday." I looked over at Wolfe. He was reading the Atlantic Monthly, unmoved by victory. "I'll put it this way," I said. "He'll never chase you, but he never forgets who paid on time and listened when it mattered." "Thank you," she said. "Both of you." She hung up. I placed the receiver down gently. Wolfe looked up. Then, "She will recover," he said. "Adversity, in her field, is an ingredient, if measured properly." "Speaking of measuring," I said, "you want the update on Gavin?" Wolfe inclined his head. "Saul says he's in Boston. No charges filed." Florence opted for silence over spectacle. "He's out of the business, at least for now. Rumor is he's cooking at a community kitchen under a different name." "Let him," Wolfe said. "Perhaps humility will season him." That afternoon was uneventful. No unexpected visitors, no conspiracies in the pantry. Fritz made a warm lentil soup for lunch, served with slices of roasted garlic and a thin ribbon of truffle oil that even Wolfe permitted without snorting. The brownstone had returned to its proper state, silent, controlled, and comfortably insulated from the idiocies of the outside world. Until the mail arrived. I sorted through the stack bills, catalogs, a wax-sealed envelope addressed in a looping script I didn't recognize. I handed it to Wolfe. He opened it with the flat of his knife, read it silently, then passed it to me. "Nero, I owe you a debt. I'm not inclined to repay in money. But if you ever tire of your fortress and wish to taste something neither sabotaged nor pretentious, come to Kitchen Niue. Tell the hostess you're there for Redemption's Table. It's unlisted. One night only." I read it twice. "You think she means it?" "I think she is attempting a gesture," Wolfe said. "Whether sincere or symbolic remains to be tasted." "You going to go?" Wolfe grimaced. "I do not dine outside this house. You know that. Even for a client who passed your test." He sniffed. "She passed nothing. She merely endured." High praise. But I could see it. The flicker of satisfaction in his expression, that rare blend of irritation and admiration he reserved for people who'd made it through his process intact. Florence Avery had been tested by sabotage, betrayal, and her own blind spots, and while she hadn't passed with flying colors, she'd survived the exam. I filed the letter away in the locked drawer marked Clients. Unusual circumstances. That night, as the evening settled into its ritual rhythm, Wolfe summoned me to the office with a bell ring. "I've written up the final report," he said, gesturing to the envelope on the desk. "Send a copy to Miss Cord. Another to Florence, should she wish to mount a legal case later." "You think she will?" "No," Wolfe said. "She's already won. A courtroom would reduce the elegance of her restoration. Dahlia, she will wait, plot, rebrand. That sort always does. And us? We resume. Until the next fool mistakes art for ownership." He closed his eyes. I stepped into the hall, poured myself a drink, and thought about Olives. Not the ones that vanished, or the ones that made the front page, but the ones Wolfe had quietly returned to Florence without ceremony, without comment. In Wolfe's world, justice isn't always gavel-shaped. Sometimes it's a perfect ingredient, restored to its rightful shelf, in a kitchen made sacred again by absence, silence, and the stubborn grace of knowing who you are. The brownstone was quiet. The air smelled faintly of time and ink. Outside, New York went on slicing itself into amuse-bouches and confessions. Inside, we were ready for whatever course came next. By Friday morning, the storm had largely passed. The food blogs, after gorging themselves on the juiciest scandal the catering world had offered in months, had moved on to a Michelin-starred chef's divorce and a leaked kitchen cam of a pastry chef screaming at a brulee torch. Florence Avery's name still flickered in the sidebar feeds, but now it was paired with words like resilience, comeback, and culinary integrity. Wolfe, of course, refused to engage with any of it. "You cannot judge legacy by gossip," he grunted, waving off my attempt to read him the last paragraph of the Gilded Forks redemption piece. "Nor character by column." "Still," I said, dropping the printout on the corner of his desk, "you managed to stop a woman's professional collapse, expose a saboteur, defuse a man with a martyr complex, and get your Olives back. That's a full week, even by your standards." He didn't reply. That meant he agreed. The only sign Wolfe gave of any remaining interest in the case came at 11:30, when he requested that I retrieve the Olive documents from the office file cabinet. I handed them over: Saul's notes, Nita Tara's statement, Gavin Pike's half-baked manifesto scribbled on Avery Tasting's letterhead, and the anonymous client complaints Dahlia had quietly instigated. Wolfe stacked them all into a manila folder, labeled Avery Internal Derailments. He then walked to the wall safe behind the globe and locked them away. "It is not the facts I wish to preserve," he said, settling back into his chair. "It's the seasoning," I finished. He gave a grunt of approval. I left him to his musings and went into the front room to return a call from Saul, who'd just received confirmation that Dahlia Brandt had boarded a flight to Paris the night before. "Changing the air or fleeing the fire?" I asked. "Could be both," Saul replied. "She's listed as consulting for a concept restaurant opening in the Marais. Something about aroma-driven identity menus. Sounds like a scam. Or an evolution," I said. "She always wanted to be the message more than the chef." "She won't last," Saul said. "Paris doesn't forgive posturing." "No," I agreed, "but it likes a good story." I hung up and returned to the office, where Fritz had delivered lunch. A poached chicken salad on a crisp brioche, with shaved fennel and preserved lemon. Wolfe ate in silence, the only sound the scrape of fork tines and the occasional deep breath of a man both pleased and annoyed to have solved a case without needing to leave his chair. "You'll admit it was a challenge," I said, as I wiped my hands. "I admit," he said between bites, "that idiocy when dressed in sophistication is more irritating to strip. Still satisfying, though. Like removing a false label from a wine bottle." He finished the last bite and leaned back. "The crux," he said, "was understanding what the olives meant." "To Florence?" I asked. "To everyone. Gavin saw them as a symbol of corrupted purity. Franco saw them as his artistic legacy. Dahlia saw them as a convenient scandal, Miss Avery saw them as an elevated ingredient. Each projected themselves onto a jar of preserved fruit. Sounds like a parable. All crimes are, Mr. Goodwin. Even the culinary ones. I gave him a moment, then asked, "What about Nita?" "She will remain silent," Wolfe said. "Not out of fear, but balance," she observed. "She erred, but she never betrayed. Will Florence keep her?" "I believe," Wolfe said, "she will. Florence has learned. She will not confuse obedience with loyalty again." As if summoned, the phone rang. I answered it. It was Florence. "I won't keep you long," she said. "I just wanted to say, I reopened the jar." "Which one?" "The replacement. The olives Wolfe sent back. I'm using them tonight." "Not at the gala?" "No," she said. "That was the plan. But plans change. I'm doing a quiet tasting for the inner circle, clients I trust. Just a few plates. No theatrics. Just food." I looked over at Wolfe, who was pretending not to listen. "He'll be glad to hear it," I said. "And one more thing," she added. "The dish I'm serving them in, yes? It's a salt cellar." I blinked, as a nod to what was almost lost. She hung up. I turned to Wolfe. "She's serving the olives in a salt cellar." Wolfe closed his eyes and smiled. "A real one, the kind that only appeared about twice a year." "Then she has understood," he said. "Not just the flavor, but the humility." The rest of the day passed in peace. I did some paperwork, refilled the ink in the office pens, and listened to Fritz hum to himself in the kitchen while preparing duck confit for dinner. Wolfe read a biography of Marcus Aurelius and refused 2 calls from a law firm that wanted help tracing a forged will in Westchester. "I will not wade through the sediment of family litigation," he said. "Olives were enough drama for one season. They were at least edible," he replied. That evening, after the dishes were cleared and the lights in the office dimmed, Wolfe sat with his beer and said nothing for nearly an hour. Finally, he spoke. "Mr. Goodwin." "Yes?" "Will you remind me tomorrow to write a letter to Miss Cord? Thank you note." "Correction." "To what?" "She referred to me as an unlikely moral compass hidden in the wreckage of a pantry." "That's not entirely inaccurate." He scowled. "It is entirely florid." I laughed. "At least she didn't say the Hercule Poirot of cured vegetables." He grunted. "Bah." I poured myself a whiskey and sat across from him. "Case closed?" I asked. "No," he said, but paused. And so it was. No bullets fired, no bodies sprawled, just a stolen jar, a bruised ego, a kitchen defiled, and a legacy preserved through salt, oil, and the sharp bite of honesty. And once again the world spun quietly on, outside the brownstone past the orchids beyond the gate, while inside, Nero Wolfe waited for his next course. The final week of September came in like a sigh, cool, gold-edged, and quiet enough for Wolfe to resume his preposterously slow rereading of Plutarch. In the brownstone, peace had returned, like a guest who takes their shoes off at the door. The phone stopped ringing, with veiled invitations and half-baked culinary inquiries, and the doorbell rang only when Fritz's butcher delivered, or when Theodore came down to hiss about temperature fluctuations in the orchid rooms. I'd started to believe the case. The missing jar of olives, as I dubbed it in my notebook, was truly behind us. Not buried, exactly, but preserved, like the thing itself, packed, sealed, and put away where only Wolfe could retrieve it for future reflection. Then Florence Avery sent a box. It arrived without a card, just a white lacquered parcel marked to be opened with care. Fritz delivered it to the office like it might contain gunpowder or foie gras. Wolfe scowled at the intrusion but opened it with his usual elegance, cutting the ribbon cleanly and peeling back the tissue paper, like it offended him personally. Inside was a glass jar, full, bright green Sicilian olives, swimming in pale gold oil, tightly sealed with a new gold ribbon. Beside it, folded once and resting like punctuation, was a note, "For what you restored." "If?" Wolfe said nothing for a long while. Then he nodded once, so slight it could have been a spasm, and handed the note to me. His voice when he spoke was soft. "She has completed the cycle." I raised an eyebrow. Redemption by courier. Redemption by clarity, Wolfe corrected. She now understands what Gavin never did, that the thing itself is never the story. It is what we make of it, what we protect in it, even if it's just a jar of olives. Wolfe fixed me with a look so level it might have frozen soup. Especially then. Later that afternoon, I made my usual circuit uptown, dropped off a copy of Wolfe's final report, lightly redacted, to Florence's office, and had coffee with Saul to review another case we weren't planning to take. On the way back, I walked past a boutique food shop on Madison Avenue and saw something in the window that made me stop. A shelf display of imported Italian goods artfully arranged. On the top row, jars of olives, nestled like jewels. One had a gold ribbon. It wasn't the jar. Of course not. But I stood there a moment longer than I needed to, because I'd seen what happened when you underestimated the weight of one simple object, when you mistook it for nothing more than garnish, or leverage, or fuel for a petty performance. I'd seen a man spiral because of what it meant to him, and a woman nearly lose her empire because she'd overlooked what it meant to someone else. And I'd watched Nero Wolfe take that meaning, strip it, weigh it, and hand it back clean. That's what Wolfe does. He doesn't chase truth with a flashlight. He waits for it to emerge, sweating, nervous, full of excuses, and then he points, not just at what happened, but why. That night, over cassoulet and a bottle of Richebourg, from the year Wolfe won a rare orchid prize, I asked him whether he ever thought of food as memory. He said, "Don't be vulgar," which of course meant yes. We ate in silence for a while. When Fritz returned to clear the table, Wolfe gestured to the unopened jar still resting on the bookshelf. "Not yet," he said. Fritz inclined his head and left it, because some things, even in our house, were sacred, and that jar, whatever it had once meant, whatever it still meant, was no longer a mystery. It was an answer. And like all answers Wolfe respected, it would wait.